The coin was still warm from her palm when she dropped it. It hit the sidewalk with a sound so small that no one else on Delaney Street heard it. Not the man selling newspapers on the corner. Not the woman dragging a laundry cart over the cracked pavement. Not the two boys chasing a dog between parked cars. No one heard it except Mara. And Mara heard it the way poor people always hear the things they can't afford to lose, like a gunshot in a quiet room. She was down on one knee before the coin had finished rolling, her fingers scraping along the gutter's edge, and when she finally pressed it into her palm again, she held it there for a moment with her eyes closed. 17 cents. That was what she had left. 17 cents and a bus card with a negative balance and a phone with 4% battery and a number she had never once intended to dial. She straightened up, pulled her jacket tighter, and looked down the block at the boy who still hadn't moved. He was sitting on the curb 12 feet away, his back against the wheel of a parked delivery truck, one knee bent and the other leg stretched out straight in front of him at an angle that didn't look right. His face was gray-white under the November streetlights. He looked like he was maybe 17, maybe a little older, dressed in clothes that cost more than everything Mara owned combined, dark wool coat, clean leather sneakers, a watch she couldn't name but recognized as the kind people wore to tell other people they didn't need to explain themselves. His phone lay shattered on the pavement 2 feet from his hand, as if it had skidded away from him during the fall and he hadn't had the strength to reach it. He hadn't asked her for help. He hadn't asked anyone for anything. But she had watched him fall. She had been standing at the corner eating the second half of the bread roll she'd been saving since noon, the one she'd bought at the discount bakery on Pryor Street for 60 cents and carefully wrapped in a paper napkin and tucked into her jacket pocket, when the boy had simply stepped off the curb and gone down. Not a trip, not a stumble. He went down the way a building comes down when the structure beneath it gives out all at once. 1 second upright, the next second not. She had walked toward him immediately, because that was who Mara Voss was. Even at 23 years old, even with 17 cents in her hand and 4% battery in her phone and nowhere she could honestly call home, she walked toward the people who went down. He had looked up at her with eyes that were glassy and unfocused, and when she'd crouched down and asked if he was all right, he'd said, in a voice that was strangely calm for someone sitting on the street in the dark, "I can't get up. My legs." And then his eyes had drifted and she'd realized he was not being dramatic. Something was genuinely wrong. His hands were shaking in a fine, almost invisible tremor that she recognized from working 2 years at a second-rate care facility on the east side before it shut down and took her job with it. She had asked him if he wanted her to call an ambulance. He had said no, sharply, instinctively, the way people say no when they've been trained to say it. She had asked if there was someone she could call. He had looked at his shattered phone on the pavement and said quietly, "My father." And then he had reached into the inside pocket of his coat, his fingers moving slowly and with effort, and produced a single white card. No logo, no title. Just a name, DeCaro, and a number printed beneath it in small, clean font. Mara had looked at the card. She had looked at the boy. She had looked at her phone with its 4% battery and its absent service plan that technically allowed outgoing calls on Wi-Fi, but almost never worked on the street. And she had dialed anyway. Mara Voss had been living in the Delaney Street area for 8 months, which was 6 months longer than she'd expected when she arrived. She had come from Millhaven, a town 200 miles south that most people in the city had never heard of, with a single duffel bag, the name of a woman she'd met online who had a spare room, and the particular brand of hope that belongs to people who have calculated exactly how much worse things can get and decided to bet on different odds. The woman with the spare room had turned out to be real, which was not nothing. The room had been a converted storage space behind a kitchen, barely wide enough to fit a cot and a small crate she used as a table, with a window that looked directly into an air shaft and a draft that ran along the floor all winter like a cold river. The rent was $200 a month, which sounded manageable until you factored in that the only work Mara could find was hourly and inconsistent, and paid in cash from employers who knew they could pay less to people with no fixed address and no one to complain to. She had done laundry at the Wash and Fold on Terrace Avenue, the early shift, 5 days a week, sorting other people's clothes at 5 in the morning, and folding them in half and tucking them into plastic bags, and trying not to think about the fact that some of the shirts she was folding cost more than she made in a week. She had done evenings at a sandwich counter when the regular girl called out sick, which happened often enough to matter, but not often enough to count on. She had walked dogs for a building on the better end of Delaney, 4 dogs on a fraying nylon leash, rain or no rain, because the woman who hired her paid in tens and didn't ask questions. She ate once a day when the money was thin and twice a day when it wasn't. She bought bread at the end-of-day discount. She made rice in the hot pot she kept in her room using the outlet near the cot. She drank water from the bathroom tap and pretended it tasted fine. What she did not do was feel sorry for herself. This was not toughness performed for an audience. It was a practical decision she had made so quietly and so long ago that it had become invisible to her, the way breathing is invisible. She had grown up in Millhaven in a house where the electricity went out every winter because her mother couldn't manage the bills after Mara's father left, and she had learned early that the distance between surviving and not surviving was mostly a question of which things you let yourself sit down and feel and which things you kept moving through. She had gotten very good at moving. But tonight, crouched on Delaney Street beside a boy she'd never seen before with his shattered phone and his shaking hands and his legs that wouldn't hold him, Mara sat very still, and she dialed. The phone rang twice. Dominic Caro was in the middle of a meeting that was not going well when his personal cell phone vibrated on the table. He did not look at it. He had 3 phones, 2 for business. One for personal, and the personal phone vibrated so rarely that when it did, the 3 men sitting across from him noticed the slight shift in his attention the way animals notice a change in wind. They did not comment on it. Nobody commented on anything in Dominic Caro's presence unless they had been spoken to first. He was 54 years old. He had a face that looked like it had been through weather not unattractive, but hard in a way that made people feel they were looking at a landscape rather than a person. He sat with his hands flat on the table, which was itself a kind of statement, because the hands of a man like Dominic Caro on a flat surface meant he was choosing not to use them for something else. His suit was charcoal gray. His tie was gone, the top button of his shirt open, which was the only concession he made to informality in any room. He ran a network that operated across the city and 2 neighboring states. He had interests in freight, in property, in the kind of financial architecture that looked legitimate from a certain angle and only revealed its true shape if you knew exactly where to stand. He had been investigated 4 times by federal authorities and had never once been charged with anything, because Dominic Caro did not make the kind of mistakes that required criminal charges to announce themselves. His mistakes were quieter. They lived in rooms that never showed up in discovery documents. They lived in the faces of the people who had crossed him and learned that the absence of violence from a man like him was not the same thing as mercy. His personal phone vibrated a second time. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He would have let it go. He had let 1,000 unknown numbers go. But there was a quality to the timing, the second vibration arriving exactly when it did, as the man across the table was pausing to shuffle his papers and the room had gone briefly quiet, that moved something in Dominic's chest he couldn't name. He picked up the phone and stood and walked to the window, turning his back on the room. Yes, he said. There was a brief pause on the other end. He could hear street noise, traffic, cold air in a microphone. I'm sorry to call this number. The voice was a young woman's, careful and not afraid, which he noted. I found it on a card. A boy gave it to me. He says you're his father. He fell on Delaney Street and he can't get up and I don't know what's wrong with him, but his hands are shaking and he said no ambulance. Dominic turned back toward the room. The 3 men looked at him and then, reading his face, looked very quickly away. Don't leave him, Dominic said. His voice was low. It did not rise. It did not break. But it had a quality to it that the young woman on the phone would later describe to no one, because she had no one to describe it to, as sounding like a door being broken open from the inside. I'll be there in 7 minutes. What are you wearing? Gray jacket. I'm next to the delivery truck. Gray jacket, delivery truck. He was already moving toward the door. "Don't leave him." "I won't," she said, and she meant it. His name was Eli. Elliot Caro. He was 18 years old and he had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, except his mother had been dead for 4 years and the eyes had lost whatever lightness they'd carried before that, and Mara didn't know any of this yet. What she knew was that he had stopped shaking as badly and had accepted the folded paper napkin from her pocket, the one that had held the bread roll, to press against the cut on his palm where he had caught himself falling, and that he had looked at her once steadily and said, "You didn't have to stay." "No," she agreed. Most people kept walking. "I know," she said. He didn't say anything after that. She didn't either. She sat down on the curb beside him because crouching had started to hurt her knees, and because sitting seemed to level something between them, and they waited together in the November cold with the city moving around them like a river moving around 2 stones on its floor. When the black car stopped at the curb 4 minutes later, not 7, 4, and the door opened and the man came out, Mara understood several things simultaneously. The first was that the boy's father was not what she would have called a normal father. The second was that the 2 men who stepped out of the car behind him and took positions on the sidewalk without being told to were not assistants or drivers in any sense she had a clean word for. The third was that Dominic Caro, walking toward his son on the pavement of Delaney Street, looked like a man who had prepared his whole life for catastrophe and had nonetheless not been prepared for this. He crouched in front of Eli and put both hands on the boy's face. He didn't speak for a moment. He just looked. His thumbs moved slightly, checking, assessing, and Eli closed his eyes briefly, and something in the boy's shoulders dropped, the way shoulders drop when the thing you've been holding yourself together for finally arrives. "Your glucose," Dominic said. "I know," Eli said. "You didn't eat." "I know, Dad." Dominic stood. He looked at the man nearest him and said 2 words, and the man moved back to the car immediately. Then Dominic looked at Mara for the first time. She was still sitting on the curb. She had not stood up when he arrived because standing up had seemed like a performance and Mara Voss did not perform. He looked at her, the way people look at something they are trying to accurately measure. "You called," he said. "He couldn't," she said. "How long were you with him?" 25 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. The man returned from the car with a small case and a sealed bottle of orange juice, and Dominic took the juice and opened it and handed it to Eli, who drank without being told twice. Dominic looked back at Mara. "You didn't call an ambulance." "He asked me not to." "And you listened." "He's not my son," she said, but he knew what he was asking. Something moved across Dominic's face. It wasn't softness exactly. It was the brief, involuntary appearance of a thing he'd spent years learning to keep below the surface. He reached into his coat. "Let me pay you for your time," he said. Mara stood up. She was not tall. She was not imposing in any physical sense. But she looked at Dominic Caro directly, without flinching, and said, "That's not why I stayed." He stopped. "Then what do you want?" he said. It was a genuine question. She could tell the difference. "Nothing," she said. "I hope he's okay." She looked at Eli, who was sitting up straighter now, the color beginning to return to his face. "Eat something," she said to the boy, as if his father weren't standing there. "Even if you're not hungry, especially if you're not hungry." Eli almost smiled. "Okay," he said. She picked up her bag. She turned to go. "Your name?" Dominic said behind her. She paused. "Mara." "Mara," he said it the way someone says a word they intend to remember. "I don't forget things." She walked away into the dark of Delaney Street, and she did not look back, and she told herself it didn't matter, and she almost believed it. 3 days passed. 4. The weather dropped another 10 degrees, and the airshaft window in Mara's room developed a new draft that came in at ankle level and ran under the cot all night. The wash and fold cut her morning shifts from 5 to 3 per week because the owner's brother-in-law needed hours. The dog walking ended when the woman in the Better building decided to send her dogs to a facility for the winter. Mara did the math on the back of a paper bag. and stared at it for a while, and then put it face down on the crate. She was at the sink in the shared kitchen on the ground floor, washing the rice pot, the single functional task of her evening, when the woman who rented the front room knocked on the door frame and said there was someone at the door for her. "For me," Mara said. "Man in a coat," the woman said, and went back to her television. Dominic Caro was standing on the front step. He was alone, which surprised her. He was looking out at the street when she opened the door, and he turned around and looked at her and said, "You're not easy to find." "I didn't know you were looking," she said. "I wasn't looking," he said. "I was making sure." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He held it out to her. "Before you say no, it's not payment, it's an offer." She looked at the envelope. She didn't take it. "What kind of offer?" "I own 4 buildings in this city, 2 commercial, 2 residential. The residential ones need a building manager, someone on site, responsive, competent." He said the word competent the way people say it when they've met enough incompetent people to have lost patience for anything less. "It pays $2,000 a month plus the unit. 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of the Tarver Street property." Mara looked at him. "Why?" "Because I need someone I can trust to be present," he said. "And you were present when you had no reason to be." "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I know more than you'd think," he said evenly. "I know you worked at Fairview Care on the east side for 2 years before it closed. I know you've been in the city 8 months. I know your current rent is $200 for a room with no natural light." He paused. "I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job. Those are different things. You know that." She did know that. She had always known the difference. Charity was the thing people gave you so they didn't have to think about you anymore. A job was a thing you earned and kept and could not have taken back without cause. She took the envelope. 2-bedroom, she said. 3rd floor, he said, south-facing. She opened the envelope and looked at the paper inside and then looked back up at him. "When?" "The unit is empty now." She was quiet for a moment. The cold moved through the open door around them. Inside the house, the television muttered. "Your son," she said, "is he all right?" The question landed differently than she'd intended it to. She could see that. Something in Dominic's face shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, the way a wall shifts before it cracks, not visibly, just in a way that something weight-bearing knows. "He has a condition," Dominic said. "He manages it poorly." He paused. "He manages a great many things poorly currently. He lost his mother 4 years ago and he is not—" He stopped. He looked out at the street. "He is not all right," he said finally, "but he is alive because you stayed." Mara nodded once. She didn't offer sympathy. She had the instinct, rare and accurate, that Dominic Caro was not a man who wanted sympathy. He wanted things to be named correctly. He wanted the true word used, even when the true word was hard. "All right," she said. "I'll take the job." He looked at her. "You'll want to see the unit first." "Probably," she said, "but I'll take the job." The Tarver Street building was 4 stories of old red brick on a block that had been declining and was now, because of buildings like this one, very slowly revering. The lobby had black and white tile that someone had kept clean. The elevator worked. The unit on the 3rd floor had 2 windows facing south and afternoon light that came through them in flat gold panels that moved across the floor as the day shifted. It had a radiator that knocked and hissed in a way that, after one night, Mara found she was already listening for. She moved in with the duffel bag and the hot pot and the crate, and she put the crate under the south window and set the hot pot on it, and she stood in the middle of the room and looked at the light on the floor for a long time. The job was real work. 3 buildings to oversee. Dominic added the 3rd 6 weeks in, without ceremony, with a corresponding addition to her pay. She handled maintenance requests, coordinated repairs, kept records, managed the handful of residential tenants in the Tarver and Grove Street properties. She was good at it in the way she was good at most things she applied herself to, not by being exceptional, but by being completely, entirely present. She returned every call. She wrote everything down. She showed up. She saw Dominic perhaps once a week, sometimes more. He was not a talkative man. Their exchanges were mostly practical: a roof repair that needed authorizing, a tenant dispute that needed a decision, a vendor invoice that seemed wrong. He listened completely and responded briefly and made decisions without laboring over them. She respected this. She had grown up around people who couldn't decide what to eat for dinner without an argument, and she had developed a deep, almost physical relief in the presence of someone who simply decided. He brought Eli to the building twice. The first time, Eli stood in the lobby while his father reviewed something on the second floor, and Mara came through with a bag of supplies for the utility closet and found him standing with his hands in his pockets looking at the tile floor. "South-facing unit treating you okay?" he asked without looking up, as if he knew which unit she had. "Yes," she said. "You look better." "I eat now," he said. "You were very authoritative about that." "I've seen what happens when people don't," she said. He looked up then, his mother's eyes, clear and serious and carrying something heavy in a way the face around them was still learning to hold. "She was a doctor," he said. "My mom, she would have," he stopped. "She would have known what to do that night, on the street." "You found someone who stayed," Mara said. "That was enough." He looked at her for a moment, and she thought he was going to say something, and then he didn't. He looked back at the floor. "Dad doesn't," he started. "He doesn't usually." He seemed to be searching for the right word for something that had never had one. "You should know he's not." "I know what he is," Mara said. She said it calmly, without judgment, the way you say something that is simply factually true. "I'm not confused about it." Eli looked at her. "And you're still here." "I took a job," she said. "I keep the things I say I'll keep." Something in Eli's face did something she didn't have a name for. She picked up the bag of supplies and went to the utility closet and didn't make anything of it. It was Dominic who told her about the boy's mother. Not intentionally, or perhaps intentionally, in the particular way of a man who has decided to say a thing without admitting to himself that he's decided. They were in the Tarver Street lobby at 7 in the evening in late January, going over the furnace inspection report, and she had asked a logistical question about the timing of the spring maintenance schedule, and something in the answer had led him, by a route she couldn't fully retrace, to the fact that he had purchased the Tarver Street building 8 years ago because his wife had liked the tile in the lobby. She had seen a photo of it in a listing and said, "That tile looks like a kitchen floor from the 40s and I love it," and he had bought the building 3 weeks later. "She died in this building," he said, not dramatically, just as information. "Third floor, I should have sold it, I didn't." Mara looked at the tile. She understood, suddenly, which unit had been given to her and why that unit and not another. "Eli was 14, Dominic said." "I know," she said, because Eli had told her in the second lobby conversation 2 months into her tenancy. They talked when Eli came. Mara had not sought it and had not discouraged it. He was a boy learning to be a person without the parent who had been teaching him how. She recognized this work. She had done a version of it herself. "He spent a year not eating," Dominic said. "Not consistently. He was diagnosed after the second hospital visit." He paused. "I was not," he stopped again. He looked at the report in his hand and then set it on the lobby desk. "I was not present in the way that the situation required. I was managing other things." Mara didn't fill the silence. "I am not a good father," he said. It was the most unguarded sentence she had ever heard him speak. It landed in the room and sat there. "You drove 4 minutes when it should have been 7, she said. He looked at her. "You knew his medical history exactly. You knew what he needed before you looked at him." She shrugged slightly. "You're an inconsistent father. That's not the same thing." He looked at her for a long time. The radiator in the lobby knocked twice, and the fluorescent light above the mailboxes flickered and held. "You're very direct," he said. "You're the one who hired me," she said. The closest thing to a smile she had ever seen on Dominic Caro's face appeared briefly, and then was gone. In March, Eli started coming to the building on Tuesdays. Not with his father alone, or with a friend, a quiet boy named Cam who read a book in the lobby, while Eli helped Mara carry paint samples up to the 4th floor unit. She was prepping for a new tenant. She hadn't asked for help. He'd arrived while she was loading the freight elevator and had simply taken the second box. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. They painted the fourth-floor unit over 2 Tuesdays. Eli was not a skilled painter. He missed edges and got roller marks in places that required going over twice. Mara corrected this without comment, and he watched and adjusted, and by the second Tuesday, the lines were cleaner. Cam eventually put down his book and helped with the trim. They ate sandwiches on the floor of the empty unit in the afternoon light, and Mara listened to the two boys talk about the things that boys of 18 talk about when they are not performing anything. And she thought about the curb on Delaney Street, and the shattered phone, and the napkin with the bread roll crumbs. One small life, she thought. That's all it ever is. One small decision. Staying instead of walking. Sitting down on the curb instead of hovering over him like a project. Dialing a number on 4% battery in the cold. The drawing appeared on the refrigerator in her unit in April, and she did not know who had put it there because she had not been home. It was done in pencil on a piece of sketch paper, detailed and careful, the lobby tile, the south window, the crate she still used as a bedside table, and a small figure sitting in the afternoon light at the window. Underneath it, in handwriting that was recognizably Eli's, she had seen it on a maintenance note he'd written once, unofficially, as a joke, 2 words. "You stayed." She taped it to the refrigerator properly, with the good tape from the supply closet, not the cheap kind that falls down overnight. She stood and looked at it for a while. She thought about 17 cents. She thought about 4% battery. She thought about the particular arithmetic of small moments, how they add up to things that have no mathematical equivalent, how a coin dropped in a gutter and a name on a white card, and a decision to stay can alter the geometry of an entire life, maybe more than one. She turned off the kitchen light and went to the window. The south light was gone for the evening, but the street below was lit amber in the lamp glow, and a few people moved along the sidewalk in the cold, and somewhere out there was Delaney Street, and the curb, and the spot where a boy had gone down and a girl with 17 cents and 4% battery had sat down beside him and waited. She didn't say a prayer. She wasn't that kind of person. But she stood there at the window for a long time, and she was quiet, and the quiet felt earned. There are people in this world who walk past the thing that falls and people who stop. Most of us have been both, on different days in different weathers. But on the days when we stop, when we stay past the point where staying makes practical sense, when we sit down on the curb beside the stranger and wait in the cold, something happens that cannot be undone. Not a rescue, not a transformation, something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. A thread gets pulled through, connecting one life to another, and it holds. It holds even when everything around it is uncertain. It holds especially then. If this story moved you, if some part of it sat with you in a way you're still feeling, please hit the like button and share it with someone who stays. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Leave a comment and tell me, what moment in this story hit you hardest? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did this one get you? I read every single one. See you in the next story.